Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining Metaverse Summit Roadshow again. So my name is Yingzi. I am the founding team of Metaverse Summit, which is happening 16th of 17th of July 2022. So now we are hosting a panel around identity and ownership. So we have 4 specialists around the different domain, around different topics, but we're mainly focusing on compliance and regulation. So welcome to our 4 panelists today. Could you tell us who you are first? Maybe starting from Philippe.
Absolutely. So my name is Philippe. I'm Chief Compliance Officer at Utrust. At Utrust, we basically allow companies to accept different forms of cryptocurrency as means of payment, and we settle to their bank account fast and in an easy to integrate way so that every single e-commerce merchant can use this as a primary payment platform for all types of cryptocurrencies. So I'll pass the ball to maybe Luke.
Everyone, thank you for having me today. So I'm Luc Falampin. I'm the CEO at ONCHAINID. So basically for 4 years, we help financial institutions to represent their assets on the blockchain. And to do that in a compliant and controlled way, we use on-chain identities. So a complete identity system, decentralized and on-chain. So I will try to share my small experience today.
Thank you, Luc. Maybe followed by Moish.
Thanks for having me on. My name is Moish Peltz. I'm a partner at Falcon Apport and Berkman, where I co-chair the emerging tech department and work with clients in the blockchain and metaverse space, on commercial matters, and also trying to help figure out how they can navigate the complex regulatory maze that exists today.
Please. Yes, please, John.
Sorry, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Hi, I'm John Nair. Sorry about that. I'm head of legal and strategy at Crucible Networks in the UK, and also one of the founding partners or directors at the Open Metaverse DAO, which is based in Zug, Switzerland. The purpose of the DAO is to fund tools and software that promote an open metaverse, and Crucible's main business is as a software development company developing the Emergence SDK agent, which is an agent that you can use across different platforms to carry your digital identity and also your digital assets. That's me.
Cool. Thank you. All the high profile guests, right? So we're digging into a lot of very difficult topic today indeed. So my first question is around identity. So we used to define an identity in the internet era, right? So different users had different online identities, let's say, different accounts and everything. So now we are coming to the era of metaverse, right? So metaverse thinking is thought to be the next generation of internet and carrying a lot of different identity of, let's say, the users or the residents of the metaverse. So what are the different approaches and forms of digital identity in the metaverses? And what is the potential opportunities and risks of the maybe blockchain-based identity ecosystem? And what would be the future cross-metaverse decentralized identity look like? For instance, maybe Luc, you have some experiences working on ONCHAINID, and John, maybe you have some observations from Crucible. Of course, all the guests have a different opinion and different maybe use cases that you observe in the industry. So maybe we can start from Luc.
Yes, with pleasure. I think what's changed with blockchain is that basically before, when you play video games and you have different metaverse video games, you just create an account. We don't need much information. Usually you have an email and a password, and everything stay within this game. So basically, it's centralized. If anything wrong happen, you go to the video game editor and you can claim whatever you want. When it's decentralized on blockchain, your identity will be more and more portable from one game to another, from one application to another. I think it's what John just mentioned by saying open metaverse. Therefore, you need your account that you can bring in one video game, in one metaverse, here and there for different services. And the main challenge comes here. How can you manage your own identity without the risk of losing your data or giving your data to everybody all the time, to manage your different wallets, to manage the different tokens, assets, NFTs that you have in this wallet. So a lot of new questions that were not there before. And also more and more you have compliance rules. I mean, we know in video games, there are many games you cannot play when you're less than 18 years old. On the blockchain, it should be the same. And now we can verify if you are more than 18 years old or not. But of course, nobody wants to do KYC process every time you play a new game. So I think the main challenge is to create this portable identity, an identity that belongs to you as a user, and not like what we have in the Web 2, where your identity is basically your Gmail account or your Facebook account on half of the services you use. Just an intro, I guess.
Yeah, on that regard, I completely agree, Luke. I think one of the challenges in the age of metaverse is that users have to go through all of that process for every single service. And that has been a pain that I think most of users have failed to do KYC in every single service provider. And I think one of the key things that could help both the user experience and also the companies themselves, because KYC for companies also has a cost. And of course, we want to decrease both the cost and the friction associated with it, and for users the same. So having a decentralized or more decentralized and unique way that will work across all platforms or most of the platforms will be an amazing user experience for users in any metaverse platform, and a boom for companies as well, because it'll just be a plug and play approach and it will decrease costs a lot. We also deal with KYC and KYB for users and companies. So that is both a pain point that I think we are more than ready to take on, and we can improve upon for communities and companies alike.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I think it's for us, it's really about ensuring that users particularly have control over their data, right? And it's not being mined and used for companies to kind of use for to generate income, etc., like that and stuff like that. So you have control over your data, over your information. You don't give it away. And I think that's for us is the biggest benefit potentially for SSI.
So it's some kind of anonymous credential system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to echo that, right? All what you're saying, right, slots in really nicely with all these things that we're thinking about from a privacy standpoint, right? So GDPR in the EU and the US, similar privacy laws, and then just kind of slotting in, at least from the US perspective, into any obligations that might exist for anti-money laundering, money transmission, bank secrecy, things like that. If there's a way to solve for that at the platform level by plugging in something where the users are qualified based on some status that's been verified by a third party, then I think it helps everyone kind of try and comply with those obligations.
Yeah, one of also the pain points is that, as you know, there are different tiers. KYC is not the same. It's actually application focused. So depending on what is needed for that particular purpose or task, the KYC level is different. So as an introductory level, maybe you need to submit your ID. So an ID verification might be enough. You might need the next tier, for example, verify your liveliness, that you're a real person. You might need to verify more things, the status as a UBO. And right now, as systems are not built to deal with all of this complexity across different chains, different protocols, and different companies. So hence all this difficulty. And at the same time, the data protection topic is a really relevant one, because sharing all of this information, it's not really needed for all the different tasks. So if I had to share all this bulk of information and like not only the ID, proof of address, but also UBO information and all of that, that's very unnecessary. It's like, going into a bar and sharing all this information with the bouncer when all he needs is just to check that, you have the legal age to drink, and that's it. And that's kind of how things are still, but I know we can do better and we will do better.
So regarding the Web2 business model is like advertising, right? So the retailers, for example, they want to do advertising to a group of users, so need the data around them. In the future, so with this new cross-metaverse decentralized identity system, will the user be able to choose kind of on counter which data they want to share, and then will they actually be able to monetize it? What will be the cross-metaverse identity look like in this sense regarding user data?
Maybe you can start from my opinion. It will work a bit the same way, except that as a user, you will be able to control who can access your data. Actually, that's the system we have built. But basically, every time you want to use a service, they need some information. It can be just a proof that you're more than 18, or it can be everything, your passport, your UBO, etc., because it can be more or less complex depending on the use case. Totally agree with what Philippe said just before. So they will request some information, and if you want to use this service, you need to accept this condition to give access to your data. But because it's blockchain based, you can revoke the access in an easier way. But all of these services, if you want to open a bank account, if you want to use a DeFi protocol, if you want to use a metaverse, they will request some data depending on what they want to verify. But at least you will be in control, and it's exactly what GDPR is trying to do for years, pretty unsuccessfully.
I think that's where the opportunities lie for companies as well, and for individuals, is that they could potentially, you come up with models where they could monetize that data. And the fact that it's been independently verified, it's not just the user who's put that data up there, also adds more value to that data, I think.
Yeah, totally agree. I do think there's a distinction that we should take into account, which is the identity data related to the user, which is used to verify that user to a specific platform, and the data that he or she generates on that platform, or the transactional data. I think those two are quite different. So although I think that the second one, the transactional data, users will be able to monetize, something that on centralized platforms they cannot, or they have a lot of difficulty to do. On the first one of the key challenges is actually applicable to financial institutions, the retention period. So because AML KYC actually supersedes some of the GDPR rights, you cannot simply revoke access to KYC information, even if you want to. So there's still some challenges on how that will be done in a fully compliant way. But I think on the second one, there's a lot of room for monetization on the transactional data, which ends up being the most valuable data over the life cycle of the user in a given platform.
Definitely. So apart from identity, another kind of characteristic of metaverse is the users can have their own property as well. But the notion itself of property is kind of to be defined as well, right? So last year, especially, there's been this right clicker mentality in NFT space, meaning that some NFT non-believers will be like, okay, I can just right click this JPEG and save it as the photo, and then it's mine. So I can just save all the $1 billion of NFTs in my PC, right? So how to balance this perception of ownership and the true, let's say, on-chain ownership, and how to judge that someone has the real ownership of something? Is it like a movable or immovable property? So maybe we can start with our legal friends here.
Yeah, I think the concept of ownership is very interesting in the idea of the metaverse, right? Because it's owning your own assets, but you're owning the token, and especially when you think about NFTs, a lot of the NFTs, the token is one part of it, but then the token links to some visual representation that you see as the image of the NFT, and owning the token doesn't necessarily give you the ownership right to the underlying intellectual property. So I think we're very early on in defining the norms for what should exist there. And I think what we've been basically doing over, up through today is taking the existing copyright regime and implying what we believe to be different usages over these IP rights through terms of service and through other methods. But I think how that's going to work going forward will be interesting to see once there's more legal or regulatory provisions that apply to that, once there's case law that develops around that on just like new uses of the token versus the IP, and then licensing. And there's all sorts of interesting use cases that emerge from users having access to that via token.
Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, totally.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So there's not a lot of thought on how the coupling of owning a digital asset or ownership of an NFT may or might not imply you own the copyright under whatever jurisdiction on that specific material. In most cases, there's not a clear link of association. This is also ties in with another interesting aspect, not specifically related to NFTs, but which is the ownership and what defines ownership of a crypto asset by itself. And there's a lot of debate on that one as well. And one of the few things that's accepted is if you have access to that NFT or to that digital or crypto asset, that is defined by your ability to actually move it. So even if you lose a private key, okay, you don't technically have access to it, but you still have the asset under your name. So it's still quite confusing what constitutes ownership of an NFT or digital or crypto asset in the legal framework in some jurisdictions. So that is still unclear, because you can still lose your private key and therefore lose access or de facto access to your crypto asset. Then the more complicated questions around copyright and NFTs come along layer on top of that. And not even talking about derivative works. So even if you own an NFT and someone wants to, do a derivative work of your NFT, do they have to ask you under which terms? Is there a GPL policy that is established over that? If yes, under which jurisdictions? So it's still a bit messy on all of those fronts.
Yeah, and I think that's multiplied when you look at other benefits that are being espoused around NFTs and digital assets and the ability to fractionalize ownership.
For sure. Yeah. That never stops innovation.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if we make the parallel with the real world, I mean, what defines ownership in the traditional world is you can prove who you are and that it is yours with contracts and stuff like this. On chain, you have a wallet. You don't know what is behind the wallet, and it can change. You don't even know if you're the only one with the access to your wallet. Maybe you're co-owner and you don't even know someone stole your key. You can change it, and maybe it's still the same person. It's just another pocket. It's just another wallet. And most of the new regulations actually are trying to regulate the wallet providers. But as a wallet provider, you don't control anything. You don't control what's coming in and what's coming out. So we think that these wallets should be linked to an identity, a representation of you on the blockchain. And it cannot be a token, it's not powerful enough. That's why we have made smart contracts to represent the identities. And to this smart contract, you can link one or several wallets. And basically, you can prove that you own this wallet. And even if you lose access to your wallet, you can still prove that it was your asset. So we created the link, I think it's for crypto, but also for any type of securities, financial instruments. Because for the moment, we are talking about you buy a few pixels on the decentralized, okay? When this pixel cost millions, we'll probably have other debates. So it needs to be clear who owns what, and it cannot be just with a wallet. It needs to be linked to an identity which is on top of the wallet, from my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned the regulation as well, right, Luke? So when we're talking about NFTs, we are not only talking about those JPEGs or decentralized lands, right? So we're also talking about different diverse types of NFTs. From a regulatory point of view, is it like crucial to determine the nature of the NFT for users to protect their rights? For example, there's like utility token, there's security token, there's maybe governance token. So what is the regulatory state of art, and what will be your prediction maybe of the future regulations in this sense?
I think we do security tokens all day, so just to talk a bit about this, but if we have securities regulation, it's for a reason. It's mostly to protect the ownership, to define the ownership, to protect the investors, that kind of things. So I think it became a bit overcomplicated over the decades, but there is a reason. You have rules when you co-own an asset, for example. So that's why we create investment vehicles, is to make sure that there are rules, and that for every different type of situation, someone dies, someone changes opinion, someone makes something wrong, etc. We have some mechanism to still keep the value for the people who have the right to get this value. And all of this should still be applied in the virtual world. I think the next challenge for the next decade is how you apply ownership digitally for digital things. And I think most of the same concepts should be applied. You need to identify yourself. You need to agree with the other co-owners how it works, etc. It's good to have a private key of an NFT, but if you are the only one thinking that because you have the private key, you have the asset that it represents, that you can use metaverse or whatever, is irrelevant. I think what makes the NFT successful last year, that suddenly everybody understood that yes, if you have this private key, it is yours. You can still right click, but it's not yours because you can't prove you have the key. So it needs to be accepted by more people, understood by more people step by step.
Yeah, the different categories of crypto assets, be it utility, security tokens, it's always been very blurry on how do you categorize what falls in, what is and what is not. And again, for many reasons, a crypto asset by its nature does not fit into one, and it can actually be mutable. It can change its nature over time. So that proves even more challenges to the regulators. Even right now, there's no agreement about which specific organization should regulate what. And it may be some internal conflicts on that. Is the SEC or the CFTC that should regulate that? There's also some infighting on that, and we see that as not a good sign for the ecosystem, because it brings a lot of confusion to this field. So I hope that this changes, and there's like a clear regulatory framework in some jurisdictions, especially in the US, on this regard, because that will bring along much more business, and it will bring more stability to the whole ecosystem, not only NFTs but whole crypto as well. Not sure if you agreed, Moise.
No, absolutely, right. I mean, it's very interesting, right? Because you can have an NFT that acts as just a unique piece of digital art, but then it can also then act as a gateway to a community, and then it can act as a governance token, and then it can act as your investment into a financial vehicle where you're investing into something, expecting a return on investment, and clearly looking like security. So there's one thing that can start off as just a piece of art that then transforms into something that is probably very clearly could be a security, right? So where is that line? When does regulation come in? How do you define that and start to draw black and white rules around that? And then just on the other side, right, of things that people want to create DAOs and engage in this new form of communal governance and exploration in that field, right? But there's a whole, again, body of law, right, about what it means to create a company and why there's certain rules over how it's managed and best practices that have emerged over hundreds of years. And if you can start from zero, or you can try and incorporate some of those learnings of what's a way in a company, right? There's centralized ways, there's more decentralized ways. How do you run a DAO with 5,000 members, and how do you do that in a way that has some regulatory certainty around it? So really interesting questions and not a lot of clear answers right now.
I think that's the most exciting thing about this whole sector, right? Is that we're creating something that hasn't been done before. But the unfortunate thing is a lot of it's being driven by US regulations, right? And definitions of securities, rather than what's probably the best thing for the community. But we have to work within the legal parameters that we've got, and there's been a lot of energy and a lot of creative legal thought into how to define things other than as security tokens. And you've seen a lot of people trip up on that as well, especially when they come to fundraising. But it's certainly something we put a lot of thought into in our DAO in Switzerland. But you get these regulations everywhere, so it is an exciting space to be in.
Yeah, it's interesting philosophically as to what the point of regulation is, right? Is it for investor protection? And I would hope for there's some rationale for it along those lines, as opposed to just regulation for regulation's purpose, right? So and if these all the things we've been talking about of blockchains proving identity and ownership, I would hope that there's a way to solve some of the reasons for that regulation on chain, and to allow there to be clearer rules that start as a default that someone is an investor that is capable of making that decision and has been verified as such externally, and then can participate in something that's more interesting without having to worry about that regulatory hurdle. So I hope the other people on this panel, like, it sounds like those are things you're working on, and from our perspective, if there's some regulatory ability to take a technological solution and use that as a way to verify that someone is entitled to do something, like in a DAO, for example, great, let's do that, right?
I think the main problem we have is that at the beginning it was to regulations were to protect investors, users, and now that you can move value on chain, they are scared about money laundering. Everything can be used for money laundering, and I think it's not really to protect users anymore. It's to just try to control the financial movements, and I think that's why we have this total disconnect between what the users want and how they use the system, and the regulators that are just struggling to understand where the money is going, and with NFTs, the regulation will come hard, because to launder money, it's perfect in many ways. We'll see.
So that's actually my next question. Like, for businesses or for project creators, for entrepreneurs, what kind of element should they take into consideration, like right now, even before all the regulatory crackdown, right? So maybe Moish or Philippe.
Yeah, I mean, it's for something like an NFT project, right? There's not a lot of clear indications of what exactly those step should be, right? And I think it's really going to differ upon each project, and even from like geographically where they're located, what their user base is, how big they are, how they're offering the tokens, whether in some sort of closed universe or some sort of open offering. It's gonna be really fact dependent and really just dependent on what they're doing and what their goals are, and how it's being used. So I don't think there's a one size fits all answer for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, can I agree with that? It's pretty much what you said. Well, where you are based, well, who are you serving, and what does it do? The specific offering, and depending on the answers to all of those, then we'll come up to what applies in that specific case. So yeah, there's no one fits all solution.
Well, I'm trying to ask for magic recipe for other NFT or blockchain project, but of course that's why they always need to look for a specific legal advice, right? So maybe we can talk about DAO. John, you helped the creation of Open Meta DAO, and then you're based in Switzerland, right? So what are the legal framework there for the current state of art of decentralized autonomous organization? And what would you think the future risks or opportunities will be in the regulatory sense?
Yeah, look, I think for any DAO, there's a number. Again, it's specific to which country you're into and what regulations apply. And we found Zug in Switzerland to be very DAO friendly. They had structures, corporate structures that you could wrap a DAO in, and that kind of aligned with what the purpose of a DAO was, with the community and being able to vote and getting without a centralized kind of board structure on it. And our whole kind of goal here is to go from something that in regulations, they need a legal entity, right? They need something to hold on to. You need something, the DAO needs to be able to execute on community proposals, etc. So you need a legal face, if you like. And how to create that so that it's not seen as a centralized board or something that's controlling the community. Because that again folds into your whole regulatory issues around security tokens and stuff like that. The whole thing needs to be very flat. So I think what we chose was an association form in Switzerland. And essentially there's a which is made up of members, and the board is really very administrative. And the members are the ones who say, well, this is what the community wants. And then the board just puts it into place. So it's not totally decentralized, but I think in the world that we're working in, and with the historic and the legal structures that we've got, you can't start off being totally decentralized. It's a gradual movement towards that. And our hope is we'll get there. But there's a lot of issues, are you creating a partnership between individuals, and are there risks between the community members? Is this a security? Is it, on and on and on? It's quite a complex area, and it's very interesting to navigate, but I don't think there's a one size fits all. And I know in the US, for instance, I think there's a lot of people are using a corporate structure. I forgot. It's gone from my head. What is it? Sorry. There is another. Sorry.
Is it cooperative?
Yeah. No. It's
So there's Delaware LLCs are very popular.
That's it. Yeah. Delaware LLC.
Or Wyoming, I guess, is another popular jurisdiction.
Yeah.
In the US, it's the same. I don't think there's one magic bullet for this in the US. And I think when more generally, when you ask people, well, I want to form a DAO, well, what does that mean? I think if you ask 100 different people, you'd probably get 100 different answers as to what a DAO means to them. And so I think some people think of a DAO as, and there's some very successful DAOs in the US operating, I think, kind of like a hedge fund, right? There's basically, they're accrediting all their investors. they're operating in a LLC structure. They have a very strong operating agreement amongst the parties that seeks to limit the liability amongst the members and against third parties. And so it looked pretty similar from the outside as to, like almost an investment fund and structured to be, something that would sustain that type of investment function, where the company can clearly make investments and distribute the proceeds of those investments to the investors. And then I think there's on the complete other side of it, just things that are more just purely for governance or for some nonprofit purpose, where there's no expectation of investment or return of that investment, and that might take a very different structure than that. So, and there's a lot of things in the middle, and I think there's a lot of things people want to do that there may not be a really good structure for right now. So it's really, I think, figuring out what the aims and the goals are of the people sponsoring the DAO, trying to figure out what structure makes the best sense for them, if that exists, and then working towards executing on that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of excitement around DAOs, right? But people don't really know that all they really are is a community of people, right? And it's about bringing together resources, whether they're human resources or capital, and how to execute on that. And companies have been around for generations, but a DAO could feasibly bring benefits of bringing those resources together very quickly and also executing on them. And you saw that with was it the Constitution DAO? I mean, they raised a hell of a lot of money in a few days to buy the Constitution, or a copy of the Constitution. I don't think they were successful in doing it. And then I think they had a whole issue with how to return those funds, but I don't know where that went. But
that was a really interesting case of, I think, I ended up actually contributing to the DAO, and okay. I wasn't involved in the organization of it, but I did see from the outside looking in that there was some frustration in trying to identify, what are people doing? Are they investing, and are they going to own a piece of the Constitution, or are they just contributing to this governance protocol that is going to govern how the DAO is lent out and seen by the public? And I think it kind of ties into the first half of this conversation of, like, what does it mean to own something? What does it mean for a DAO to own something? What does it mean for you to own a piece of that DAO? And I think the answers to all those levels could potentially be different depending on the circumstances and the regulatory environment around that. So it's a very interesting, actually, case study of what ownership means and what it means to own a DAO.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, all those topics are kind of linked together in the metaverse, right? So in the metaverse, we will have like digital identity, and we can maybe do some work for a DAO, having some government right. And we also will have to maybe spend money to purchase either purely the digital item, virtual item, or an item that is representing the ownership of a real life item, right? So how can all this be tangled together? What will be kind of the future compliance, under regulation, nobody's got scammed virtual world look like? So maybe we can start from you, Philip, from UTrust point of view, like how can we bridge this virtual world or virtual life with the real life?
Well, they're already more entangled than you might think. So for those versed in online gaming, we've been doing this for a long time, buying virtual goods. For years. Even then, when there was no blockchains, there was no concept of this. People were trading items and skins and different types of materials between themselves, even in a closed gaming ecosystem. So the concept of buying things for your virtual avatar, it's nothing new. What's really interesting here is that how real money, and crypto assets are real money, how does it tangle into the both purchase and sale of those items, and how those items can be traded? And tying that to that, how can we assure that consumers are protected when they purchase something like that? For example, with UTrust, we serve different NFT providers. allowing them to sell their NFTs in the marketplace and allow them for them clients to pay with cryptocurrencies and for them to receive in their bank account that amount for the asset. Either if it's a digital asset or a real asset, for us makes no difference. Their assets, their purchases on a vendor, either they happen, you know, on a physical store or on the metaverse. Same thing. The thing is, for traditional e-commerce and for the metaverse as well, you can pay directly with your crypto assets. You can do that. You can do purely on-chain payments, and we process on-chain payments as well. What tends not to happen is the reversibility, therefore the consumer protection element. So if you want a refund, so I bought a skin, I want a refund. How does that work? Who's gonna protect my rights if I get scammed, and where can I get my money back? And unfortunately, the answer is no. There is no mechanism because transactions are not reversible in that way. So I do believe there will always be some kind, or for a segment, there will be some kind of intermediation for the companies serving those articles to general consumers to either build their system themselves, which seems very unlikely because it's not their focus as businesses. They want to serve their customers and not build payment rails, or to have some kind of system that helps them do that. And that's where we come in, to help the merchants have a way to not only accept payments, but if something goes bad in a transaction, there's a way for the client to prove, hey, here's my receipt for my item, okay? I bought it, I use crypto assets the same as if I use euros or dollars or whatever. Hey, I would like a refund under my rights, and they can do that with uTrust. So that's one way that we see to help mitigate the pains in this segment.
Apart from like virtual assets and real life assets, we also have the problem of changing the mindset of people having a government issued ID and, you know, traditional nationwide ID and the on-chain ID. So Luke, can you tell us like more about how should people think about their like future version of on-chain ID in comparison with like the traditional mentality, and also what would be the benefit actually to have this kind of on-chain ID?
I don't think it's incompatible. I mean, what is an identity? It's a bunch of data. It's where you're born, it's your name, it depends, but it's a lot of attributes like this. And yes, most of these attributes are confirmed by your country, where you're from, or your nationality, and that's what is commonly accepted. So why not creating a bridge between all of these identities, attributes, and the blockchain? And from my opinion, in my opinion, blockchain is not creating trust from nowhere. It's executing the trust. So that's why when we built on-chain ID, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, to put all of the data on-chain, extra. No, we just take trusted third-party players, like your banks can be a trusted third-party, your real passport, it's issued by your government, all of this trusted party, and we link your on-chain ID. So in your on-chain ID, you have proof that you have a passport, that you have a bank account in this bank, that you have an account on this metaverse, whatever. And then you can use all of this proof to connect to services. So basically, we just digitize the trust from the real world, but by default, it will not come from the blockchain, from decentralized systems. It's just a bridge to make sure that in the virtual world, you can use what defines you, what defines your identity in the traditional world.
So maybe one last kind of challenging real world question. So the founder of Signal, Moxie, wrote an article like a week ago, writing about Web3 and decentralization. And in the article, he mentioned, well, he's NFT is taken down by OpenSea because, quote unquote, it violated some term of service, and he cannot find this NFT in any crypto wallet at all afterwards. So when we're talking about Web3 and decentralization, what are we talking about? And if the platform like OpenSea that is centralized can take down users' NFT or digital assets, how can the user's right be protected in the current state of art? And maybe for the regulators, how can they do in the future to protect the user, like in this case? It's a very high level question. Just feel free to say your opinion, or like, or it's too tricky to say today.
Just a quick comment, but I think you always rely on the service you use. I mean, even if you choose to use OpenSea or Coinbase, okay, of course you have terms and conditions, but actually if you use Ethereum versus Polygon versus Tezos versus, you accept a set of rules, and depending on what you want, your own level of risk. But it's the same for everything in life. If you decide to live in France or in the US, you have different type of rules. So I think people tend to do a bit too much about all of this. I mean, if you want the user experience of OpenSea, accept OpenSea conditions. If you don't want this, you use directly the blockchain network or another platform. But of course, people need some web interfaces to access the blockchain, otherwise it's too complex. And I think part of the challenge is to make sure that most of the services are front ends and not reinventing the whole backend, saying we hide the complexity and just centralizing everything. So it's hard to see, and more people get educated, so they will not get tricked too much, hopefully. But for sure, we need this layer of user experience, and hopefully the compliance part will not be re-centralized like we have in Web2. It could be still centralized somehow and under the control of each users.
Yeah, I think it's the same or similar problem that content moderation on, for example, other platforms like YouTube have. How do you prevent dissemination of certain type of content which is explicitly forbidden by that service provider, whoever that service provider is? And even if they're decentralized, they serve target geographies. A very concrete example, you can have art with very controversial content in Germany that is perfectly legal in the US. For example, the Nazi flag or something like that is completely illegal in Germany. You cannot display it. For example, sharing art about it, not allowed. Other countries, perfectly allowed. And you have countless examples like that, even more controversial. So whatever service provider you use, you would have to comply with those applicable rules. And if that service provider doesn't, they eventually get hit with some kind of takedown or notice, and they won't be staying there for long. So yeah, I think it's a tricky one, and it might lead to some regional fragmentation of providers depending on applicable rules. Again, in a natural way that we have in the physical world as well. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's a question of choice, isn't it? And I think what you're seeing out there is a lot of new ventures starting up, which are going to open up the choice. And you can choose to play in Zuckerberg's closed metaverse and have your data farmed, etc. Or you can go and play in another sandpit where it's open and you own your data and you like the community and you trust the community to police that area well, and it's aligned with what your beliefs are, I suppose.
Exactly. I think what we need to nail down are the incentives for the community in whatever platform to police that community well in a fair and reasonable way. So I think that's the way forward for us to tackle this this issue head on, because at some point, for content that is submitted and generated by the community, there has to be an equal moderation attempt by the community itself. Otherwise, you have outside forces stepping in to stamp out and to forcibly take that content down.
Yeah, and it's interesting what we're doing. We're using reputation points to kind of, so that the community can moderate itself. So it's based on your positive engagement with that community, and that gives you the more control over policing that community. So it's not someone out coming in from outside, it's people within the community who've positively engaged in that community who get reputation points and then can vote on things as to whether people should be thrown off as bad players or whatever it might be.
I thought, the article by Moxie was very actually well written and very interesting, and they were equally well written, like counter arguments. But I think it's interesting, right? Because a lot of the work I've done is from like an intellectual property, copyright perspective, and thinking about things like BitTorrent, and there's really no way to take it down. And I think that kind of exists here too, right? If you don't want to use OpenSea, you don't have to. If you want your community to be governed by some other protocol, you can use all the data on chain and just spin up a different protocol or go somewhere else. And so you're seeing a lot of competition, a lot of opportunity kind of out of this. Where Moxie's argument was we're kind of very early, and some of the countermarkets like, well, of course we're early, and there's going to be lots of things that are going to build upon what is now a relatively centralized way. But I think you see also that there's a lot of opportunity then for regulators or people who see things that like their content being misused to say, well, that's not fair, and to try and in kind of the chaos now to overregulate or to set rules that may prevent future innovation. So it's a really interesting balance as to the technical innovation versus the regulation, and where that line is and what's permissible and what's not.
Well, thank you all the 4 panelists for sharing different experiences, stories, and visions around compliance and regulation in terms of metaverse identity and ownership. Those words are like big words. We are still early, let's say, in every sense. Regulation still early, in the business sense still early. So we're definitely looking forward to whatever happens, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So thank you again. Thank you, Philippe, Luc, Moish, and John for joining our panel today. And looking forward to see you in the metaverse virtually or in Metaverse Summit physically in place in Paris.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.